Welcome to episode 83 of the Necronama.com. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now, and my favorite dish is fish. I eat it just for the hell of it, a little bit of halibut.
And I am Don Guillory, author, historian, educator, co-host of this podcast, and, not too musically inclined. I like my share of musicals, but, I'm going to commit blasphemy a few times by saying that there are certain musicals that everybody else loves that I don't. However, this is one that I actually like.
All right, so joining us today, Michael Varrati. Thank you for doing the show, man.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the most recent thing I've seen is Deathcember. And tell me, how did that come about?
Sure. So Deathcember is, for listeners who don't know, an international holiday horror anthology that the conceit is that it's set up like an advent calendar, and behind each door is a different horror story. And the project was put together by three producers out of Germany. And they had this sort of machination to create just a big anthology of international Christmas and Hanukkah bloodletting. And they went out into the world and started finding filmmakers to participate. And I actually was brought to the project by Chelsea Stardust. Listeners might know her. She was the director of a movie called Satanic Panic. Yes. But they had reached out to Chelsea about participating, and she wasn't able, but she forwarded the names of several directors, including myself, and they reached out to me. And so a little background, I am a screenwriter and a filmmaker, and I make a lot of movies within the horror genre. Mm-hmm. But as a point of interest to people who are within the genre and don't kind of know about the other side of my life, I've also had a nice little career doing TV movies, and that includes some of those holiday movies that you see on networks like Lifetime or Ion or Hallmark. And they became very fascinated by the fact that it's like, oh, we could have someone who's done Christmas movies and who does horror movies, but heretofore has never actually combined those two things together. And for me, it was kind of fun because it's very rare in Hollywood that you get to live a multifaceted life. Like, the industry really loves people to be put in a box and to be just one thing. And I somehow have managed to defy those expectations by, doing a little bit of this over here, doing a little bit of this over here, and managing to pull it off. And I feel very grateful and lucky. But I also was very fascinated by the idea of getting to bring some of my worlds together. And the thing about Deathcember was they kind of allowed us the opportunity to pitch a story, and if they liked it, it would become part of the anthology. And I knew that Killer Santas and Krampuses, that seems to be like the go-to material, for holiday horror. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. But what do I think is scary about the holidays? What frightens me about this time of year? And shopping, I hate it. I used to work retail when I was in college, and it was the worst time of year to be behind that cash register. And I pitched them a story that was set at a department store all about an entitled woman from the suburbs. I guess, like, by today's standards, we would call her a Karen, but that was not part of my lexicon when I wrote this. But she comes in to exchange a gift that she purchased for her son, because in the time since she bought it, something newer and better has come out, and her son deserves the best. And she doesn't have the receipt. And when she doesn't have the receipt, the cashier kind of pushes back, and it devolves into violence. Because I wanted to sort of do sort of that spaghetti Western last stand in a department store, or I described it, I remember, to my cinematographer, as I sort of want to do the last act of War of the Roses at a store. Okay. And that was what I pitched. I mean, obviously, it was a grander idea than probably the budget that we ended up getting. But so my segment was called All Sales Fatal. It stars Tiffany Shepis, acclaimed horror icon, and also features an appearance by Jeffrey Reddick, the creator of Final Destination. We shot it in downtown Los Angeles a couple years ago. And it became part of the anthology. I got to travel to Germany at the beginning of 2020 in January for a premiere at a German film festival. It was very lovely. At that time, obviously, we didn't know the world was going to shut down. Every now and then I think about, what if I had just stayed in Germany and not come back? And now December is out in the world. And like I said, I am just one of, I believe, 25 other segments in featuring other filmmakers that are very known across the space. Ruggero Deodato, who made Cannibal Holocaust, directed one of the segments. Lucky McKee directed a segment. Sam Wyman, Vivian Vaughn, Amalia. So many, Isaac Esbon, filmmakers from all over the world brought their own kind of spin of holiday horror. And it was a really cool project to be part of. And what was really great about it is it allowed me as an artist and filmmaker to connect with a lot of fellow filmmakers and forge sort of friendships on this movie that we all got to work on, but we didn't necessarily get to work together. So like it became like everybody sort of became pen pals over the couple years, just kind of sharing our experiences.
And that's kind of crazy because if it was made today, that's how it would also be. You'd be pen pals, like filming in your own areas. That's crazy how it's like very, very much a mirror of that, you know?
It is. And that movie it was a journey because, like I said, we shot it a couple of years ago. But movies sometimes take time, and especially a movie when you're dealing with this many moving parts, with this many filmmakers, with this many cast members. Because the cast across the board, not only the people in my segment, but Barbara Crampton's in a segment, Barbara Manolfi from Suspiria's in a segment, AJ Bowen. It's really such a cool project to be part of. But I think that, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying, the German producers, while this was a brilliant idea, probably when they got all of the parts together and were like, oh, you have to put this together and make a movie. That was like a huge task for them. So like it was kind of one of those things that we all made and we were excited about it. But I was even thinking about it and talking to my production partner when it finally came out here stateside. I was like, it's so wild. I was like, because, I've directed 2 other things plus a season of television since we made this. It's like it feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago. So it's cool to see it finally out.
Wow, that's such a cool backstory. I didn't have any idea about any of that, so that's great. So you had mentioned like Lifetime type movies. What do you see that and horror have in common that most of us wouldn't see?
It's funny. We who do these get asked this question a lot because I think probably what would surprise a lot of viewers is that there is a lot of behind the scenes crossover with the world of television, holiday movies, and horror filmmakers, because a lot of us do both. And in fact, I just kind of even pulling it back, I will tell you how I got the very first Christmas TV movie that I did. It was a movie called A Christmas Reunion starring Denise Richards for Ion and then later Lifetime. I was contacted because one of the producers of that movie, they were looking to put another Christmas movie together because the network needed a film to fill an air date. And they were just like, hey, we need another movie. And there was sort of like a time constraint on it. And he was like, I know this guy who knows how to write a good movie quickly and can do it to budget, because that's something that horror filmmakers are very adept at, because we, especially if you come from the indie sphere, the low budget, you mentioned Poultrygeist when you were talking about musicals, like nobody can stretch a dime better than Lloyd Kaufman. And that Lloyd's school of thinking is sort of built off of Roger Corman's school of thinking. It's like make every dollar count, and horror filmmakers get that in ways that some filmmakers don't. And so it was sort of like they came to me and they were like, is this something you're interested in doing? And the reality was, until I got that phone call, I don't think I had ever thought about writing like a rom-com holiday movie for TV. But it was sort of like, I love stories and I love characters and I love the ability to explore new territory. And I was like, you know what? This is wild. I love wild. Let's do it. And I had my initial meeting, and I remember the producer was like, just so you know, once this happens, this movie will be with you for the rest of your life. And at the time I kind of laughed because, like, what's that even mean? But the truth is, these movies have very dedicated audiences. Mm-hmm. And once people find a Christmas movie they like, they make it part of their tradition every year. Mm-hmm. So when you make one of these movies, it becomes part of other people's holiday. Like it becomes part of what they do. So I was told, like, this movie will air on TV. If it's popular, it will air on TV like long after you're dead. And so what's the correlation between horror and this? In a way, it's exactly that. And I always like to say they're both in their own way cult films, because really, at the end of the day, what is a cult film but a movie built around a community built around a movie? And each of these styles of movies have a fan base and a community. And when you go into watching them, there's a set of expectations and a set of rules and a set of things that you look for that, like, makes you happy as a fan of that genre. Obviously, the rules and expectations for each are different, but kind of the backbone of that devotion is the same. And I think that's why people like myself, people like Ron Oliver, who also created Prom Night 2 and 3, or David Dakota or Sam Irvin, who made Elvira's Haunted Hills, they all do Christmas movies quite regularly because it's kind of like a DNA that we understand. And then when we get to go back and be spooky and fuck things up, like, we do it. But it's like, it's kind of fun to walk the balance. I sometimes like writing both because, like, on this movie, I can get really mean and dark. And then once that's out of my system, I can go over here and be cheerful until I'm ready to get mean and dark again. You know, it kind of is a nice balance.
Oh, I love that. The cult thing, I mean, that is such a great description for it. And I've never thought of it in those terms, but that makes so much sense. And that's kind of what I was thinking about when you first said it. I was like, making them has to be pretty similar, like, because in my head, same thing. I was like, you have the set rules and you have these things that you have to do, or at least that are expected, and you have to get close. Maybe you twist it a little bit, but you know where you're supposed to go. And so that's why I asked. I didn't realize that that's a question you get asked all the time, though. So that's fine.
No, but I think it's very, I think it's a very valid question, because I think sometimes people look at the genres and see the disparity in terms of just like the content. But I think the reality is they exist, even though they both have large audiences. I don't think anyone is going to pretend that both of these kind of genres have niche appeal. And that's sort of like the whole foundation of a cult film. And, you know, even the not holiday movies, because I have had some success writing thrillers for Lifetime, and they often are really sort of built on that erotic thriller kind of DNA of the 90s, where it's like, you know, a woman in danger, and usually there's some sort of like sexually malevolent or murderous, you know, plot. And I remember that Joe Bob Briggs was doing an interview, and someone asked him about the death of the drive-in movie. And Joe Bob said, well, he was like, they don't make the drive-in movie the way they used to, like, you know, where it was the double feature, where it would be like the headliner and then whatever the like scandalous, sleazy second movie was. He's like, but Lifetime makes those movies now. They just have made them for TV. And I was like, oh my God, Joe Bob gets it. Because when I write a movie, I wrote a movie called The Wrong Stepmother, which is literally about a woman who assumes the identity of a stepmother to kind of take over a family. And when they find out, she tries to kill them all. And that stars Cindy Busby and Vivica Fox. I wrote that as a slasher movie. I just, in the kill scenes, like went light on gore because I knew Lifetime wouldn't do it. But like, I wrote the movie exactly how I would write a horror film. And so there is a bridge between all of them, because it's all niche audiences and niche expectations and what makes people happy in those spaces.
For myself, I'm very much, you know, I normally write horror, but my go-to movies, and I say this all the time to Don, and he rolls his eyes to me. My go-to movies are Mean Girls, Easy A, Not Another Teen Movie. My wife is always like, you just wrote like this scene where you slaughtered like 5 little kids. and now you're out here watching Easy A and basically dancing to Pocket Full of Sunshine. What the fuck? And I mean, the way you just described it is exactly how I feel. It's that whole, okay, I got that out, and now I'm in a great mood, and I want to go do this. And so you just made me feel a million times better about myself. Thank you.
well, also, I think that because I've also been asked before, and I think it speaks to what you're talking about how would I prepare those movies differently? And I always tell people I don't. How I write a movie is how I write a movie. Because if you're writing a movie expressly with the idea that your characters know what kind of film they're in, you've already sort of lost the plot. Because on a given morning when you wake up, you don't know how your day's going to go. So it's sort of like you need to create the characters and establish the world. And then when the world happens to them and how they react, that's what defines the genre. I mean, when someone gets up and we're like, we're going to get in the car and we're going to drive to grandma's house for Christmas. It's like maybe they get there and they celebrate Christmas, or maybe the car breaks down on the way and they have to use the phone at that castle a couple miles back. They're still the same people. It's the circumstances that change that make it a horror movie or a nice night at grandma's, you know?
So, Michael, I always ask people, why did you pick this film? And I know we kind of went back and forth on a couple choices, but once you locked it down and this was the one, what made this be the one that you wanted to go with?
A number of reasons. I really do love holiday horror. Probably when I was talking about December, you could hear my glee of that kind of crossover. And I have a great affinity for this kind of subgenre. I love Silent Night, Deadly Night. I love Bob Clark's Black Christmas, Gremlins. So, and I just sort of love kind of this sullying, for lack of a better term, a time that's supposed to be so precious, because the reality is Christmas is probably less precious than we think. It's a stressful time. Right. It's a very, forced upon time sometimes. And I think it does have the potential to lean into something dark if you really want it to. And I really thought this movie just felt right in this moment of time, because what better to discuss during a pandemic than a zombie movie, one. And two, as someone who lives quite frequently in a cross-genre space, this movie is in many ways the epitome of cross-genre. So I just wanted to kind of like look at that and all of the things of what that means. Plus, I just think that it's time that this movie got canonized a little bit more, because there's a lot going on here that I think is really cool. And that's it. I hope that sells the point.
And I have to thank you for picking it, because I've been putting it off. It was on my list on Hulu, and I just kept sitting there. I was like, all right, I'll get around to it. And then James said, hey, we're going to do Anna and the Apocalypse. I was like, all right, finally. I'll go ahead and sit down and watch it and give him my opinion of it.
We just talked about like the rules of different genres and things like that. Do you think that this crosses so many that you don't know what to expect? Do you think that's a really good thing?
I think it's a great thing. I mean, obviously, horror comes with expectations, especially when you're an ardent fan and you've seen it all, or you think you've seen it all. And like we kind of head into these movies thinking we kind of know what we're getting. And to some degree, like you do, because you can't go so wildly afield because you'll lose people in another way. But look, I mean, the reality is, for a little backstory, before I lived in LA, and for a lot of my life, I lived in the greater Pittsburgh area. And Pittsburgh's, favorite son is George Romero, and for very just cause. George Romero completely redefined and in many ways created the modern zombie genre. But the problem is also George kind of did it best for so very long that a lot of what we see is an echo of what George Romero did. Mm-hmm. So when you find a way to finally it's rare, and I'm not saying it's bad, like, because zombies persist for the reason that we do kind of like that familiarity, and also because the idea of a contagion of the undead, there's countless stories to be told, because that's literally just something that there's always going to be new ways to contend with it. But it's rare now. how many, like 5 decades, 6 decades since Night of the Living Dead, to get a zombie movie that I feel like really gives us something fresh in that place. Shaun of the Dead, of course, is a great example of something that did something new in a reverential way. But I think the cross genre here really works because you have a certain expectation. To, like, you know, the long way around to answering your question. It plays with our expectations, and it in some way delivers to those expectations. But by not knowing what to expect because you think it's one thing and you also get a little bit of something else, that's great, because I want to go to the movies and be excited and maybe see something new.
Couldn't agree more. That's exactly how I feel. And I think that's what I loved about this so much, is I felt like we followed the rules of all of the genres in a way that worked. And that really reminds me of musicals. I pointed this out to Don today because I'd never been able to put this into words before. But one of the things I like about musicals is that when it hits a song where multiple people are singing it, that means that all of them are experiencing the same themes, the same point of the story, if you will. But we're getting their multiple stories and their multiple roads, and the genres do the same thing in this to me. We're following all the rules. We're just getting it mashed together into one big song. And I thought that in and of itself was kind of a cool mirror as well.
Well, I think, you know, what doesn't get brought up enough, but I've had some really great discussions about this in the past with other creators, and there is, for some horror fans, a kind of some affinity for both. And I think it makes sense. At the end of the day, I think that when you really break it down, horror and musicals share a kinship, because at the end of the day, the DNA of both of these genres is all about heightened presentation. Mm-hmm. You take something and present it in a heightened reality. I mean, obviously, in the case of a musical, it's a song, but in the case of horror, it's a scream. But it all often takes what we know about base reality and pushes it into a space of otherness. And again, of course, we know not all horror fans are into musicals and vice versa. But I think that if you like step back from your everything and just kind of look at the makeup of how these genres work, it makes sense that they would work together because they kind of approach things in a similar way. It's just the payoff is different.
Appealed to everything I love, because it's kind of got the teen high school movie going on, and it's kind of got like horror and musicals, and even like you kind of get a feel of a Western in a couple places, and just all these little nods and these little things that work together are just beautiful. But I just really appreciated it, and I wish that they would do more stuff like this.
You know, I think one of the things that I really do appreciate about this movie is that it crosses all these genres, but it kind of doesn't pussyfoot around with them either. Like it doesn't go light on anything. When it's a musical, it's a musical. But when it goes into horror, it's horror. It could have been very easy for this film to spare its main cast because they're the leads, and do the very simple rom-com comedy, like, he's the boy who's been pining for her. But then when it takes that third act turn and things get really dire, I'm glad it did. It's like it recognizes that all of these things can walk hand in hand, and you don't have to tread lightly.
And then that's another thing I pointed out to Dawn. I love that this doesn't become a typical, she has to choose between the boys, and she has to end up with one of them. Like, we don't
I
really.
was extremely worried about that.
There's kind of connotations, but that's not the focal point. Right. I really appreciated that.
Well, because in reality, that's not where it would have gone. It wouldn't have been. I mean, where they get at the end, where it's she, Nick, and of course I forgot my favorite character's name. The young lady with the blonde hair. I forgot her name, but anyway, even at that point, it's not clear. Like she's not interested in him in that way anymore, and it's been expressed a couple of times. It's just the three of them. It still doesn't get to that point where things are going to be great. We ended up together, so it's meant to be. They kept going in that horror direction, and that ambiguity of that ending of we don't know what the hell is next. So
Well, and I think you really got that the nail on the head there, because, when we were talking about George Romero, one of the things that people always praise about Romero is how he used zombies as allegory in a really, really smart way. Like Night of the Living Dead really addresses the issue of the civil rights movement at the time. Dawn of the Dead is about consumer culture. Day of the Dead is military industrial complex, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what's really cool about Alien Apocalypse, when you kind of pull it back, this movie's super allegorical as well, but it doesn't approach those issues that Romero did, which are very like macro issues. It's the micro issue of when you're a teenager and your life's about to fundamentally change, and you are going to move on, and people are going to fall away and fall out of your life, and you are going to go somewhere you don't know and take a leap. And it's like, I love that this movie is all about the social structure of growing up. And I think that that's a really brilliant way to make a zombie movie.
And I like how they set you up with that at the beginning, because when she's having a discussion with her father and he's saying like, oh, you're going to go to university. And she's like, no, I'm not. I'm going to go to Australia. I'm going to travel for a year. I'm going to do this. And you see that for me, I mean, this is a while ago since I was in high school and had to have that feeling of I'm leaving. I don't know what's going to happen. But I immediately felt everything that she was trying to convey to her father, which was, my life is in my hands. I want to try things out. I want to see things because I don't know what is going on. Her father's saying, like, if you go on this trip or if you go away, you're going to be a year behind. And juxtaposing that fatherly way of looking at it and saying, like, hey, and I'm sure at one point he's probably thinking, like, I'm a janitor in this school, in this school. I don't want you to fall behind. I want my child to do better than I'm doing. And that pressure that he probably had as a father, the mother's dead. The mother's gone, and he's the only one in her life, to where he feels that responsibility that if she's successful, he can hang his hat on being a good father. If she fails, it's his fault for not setting her on the right path. So I have to push you this way. But then she's looking at it as nothing's set for me. Like, why should I rush to go to college when I have an opportunity to go do something else? Because I might not want to go to college.
Exactly. I think a really powerful moment also in line with what you're saying, it happens much later once the shit has hit the fan, and it's when she and Josh are in the shopping cart and he's like, well, I guess you can't leave now, and despite the zombie apocalypse, despite everything that's happening, she's like, well, why not? And
I love that part.
Me too. I think that is so, I mean, especially now when the world's tits up, like, why not follow the thing that you feel in your heart? Like that storyline and her still needing to break away, opening song, is so powerful all throughout. And I think it's a really, really well constructed narrative arc for her character.
Well, it's also, really fast, I want to back up to something Don said. When you mentioned him being a janitor, I'm glad we don't know that to start with, because while that is there, the whole, I don't want you to only do what I did, I want your life to be better. Mm-hmm. I love how universal that is. That's every single person that's been in that position. It doesn't matter what your dad did. He could be Jeff Bezos and do your own thing.
Well, you and I've had this discussion.
Looking for a White House job.
Yeah.
But
no, Sid, you and I have had this discussion before about, like with my daughter and even my nieces and nephews. Like I've told their parents as well as my wife, like, unless my child wants to go in the Army or wants to go in the military, she's not going because she has to. That's not going to happen. And that's nothing against the military. I was in, my parents were in, but it was one of those things where it was because of necessity, not because of desire. For education, for finances, things like that, or at least a stable positioning in life. And just looking at that was why my parents went in initially. And that's also why my mom stayed in, was I want to be able to provide for my kids and make sure that they're better off than I was, because she grew up in a sharecropping community. So she didn't want to, she coming from that part of the world, and that experience, she didn't want her kids to have to go through that. And then, you kind of pass on that generational, I guess, obligation that, your kids have to do better than you did, or you have to make sure that things are going to be easier. And, it perplexes me to this day, the people who complain about kids having it better off, because that's kind of the point.
Right.
And you see that with the dad. And I'm sure you would have seen that with any of the parents if there had been a little bit more focus on them as well. But I think focusing, or at least making it look as though the dad is just dropping her off for school until about 20 or 30 minutes into the movie, you're like, oh shit, that's what's going on. That's why her dad is so focused on making sure that she does the right things. It's kind of like, look, I have to put up with a lot of shit with people. I don't want you to have to do it.
Right. And going back to the shopping cart scene, what I like about it is the same kind of thing. It's that generalization, right? Mm-hmm. So she's kind of the moody teenager. She's got the whole I'm not doing what you say going on that we're used to in movies. But when we hit this shopping cart scene, even though it's kind of been solidified before that, that's the point where you realize how empowered she is. She's not staying because some guy tells her to.
Right.
She's not staying because her dad tells her to. She's doing her shit. And like you said, the rest of the world's fucked up. So I'm going for what I love. And I think that is what made me embrace this movie so hard, because I'm so used to movies taking that from women and making them stay for love or making them stay for family. And I loved that it never changes. It's never a question. It never dips down. Is she going to stay for the boy? No, it's 100% the entire time. That's great. We'll do what we got to do, but then I'm fucking out of here.
Well, and they also make it to where she's not following a boy either.
Right.
Because that's been done in a few films where she's not using, even when she says a trip, it's not even clear like who she's going with. It's like, I'm going here.
I don't think she's going with anybody.
Yeah. And that's the great thing about it. Like she's going, and what's really bad is I just watched Taken yesterday. So I immediately thought it's like, if this were another movie, she's going to Australia and she's getting kidnapped or the zombies are there. But, even that trope of, oh, there's this guy, he's going like Legally Blonde. He went and got accepted to Harvard Law. Now I have to go there to have some meaning with my life. And I'm glad the movie turns out a different way where she realizes like she doesn't need him. Fuck him. I'm going to, do this great thing to prove to you that I'm not some dumb idiot out here. I'm capable.
Yeah, her agency is so strong all throughout. And I think that's such a credit to this film. I mean, and it's not just in the bigger picture issue of her, like, I'm not going to stay in this town. I'm going to follow my heart. Even in the shopping cart scene where we could have had that real teen moment where it kind of looks like Josh is going to express his feelings for her. And she kind of doubles down and says, you're my best friend. You're my best friend. Like saying to him, like, right. Don't do this. And you know what? He gets it, which I think we also need to see. And I also think like teenagers need to see that, like, because you can't expect everybody to just bend to your emotions all the time,
Yeah, he actually takes no for an answer. And that's something we don't see enough in Hollywood movies. He doesn't even get to the question, but she gives him the answer. And then he not only respects it, he doesn't just leave. He's not upset she won't sleep with him or date him or whatever. He doesn't just cut out. He still stays with her. And he constantly values being her best friend. And he constantly pushes the rest of the time that he's alive to make sure that he's there for her. Not to save her, but to be by her side.
Honestly, I just think this movie is really marvelously constructed for all of the reasons that we're talking about, because it is a great allegory for growing up. It's a good horror story when the horror kicks in that it doesn't shy away from. I think the musical sequences are really brilliantly realized. But even it hits the notes of a Christmas movie, because, the expectations of a Christmas movie are, finding power in self and those around you. And usually these movies are all about, like, family and the strength that you get from that. And this movie, in its own bizarre way, provides that. When she has that final moment with her dad, she's further empowered by the relationship and the love they share, even if he does not get to go with them. And I think that in a real world way. That's a more realistic way about how we take strength from other people. It's not traditions. It's not wreaths on the door, and it's not making sure that you're home every holiday, although that's nice when you can be. It's what people bring to our lives and add to our stories that make it stronger and better and make us feel a little more secure in the world. And I think that this movie was very aware of those Christmas tropes and showed how that works in the world of a zombie apocalypse. And I thought that was really awesome.
If 2020 has taught me anything, it's that people hold on to some traditions just to hold on to that little bit of normal in our lives. So while I'm not advocating for large family get-togethers, I totally understand why you might need to watch a certain Christmas movie or do something that you normally do with your family, even though you can't see them this year. It really showed me just how universal it is that you would still cling to these little things that you normally do when everything else is falling apart.
Absolutely.
You have to have some sense of normalcy, and we talked about this earlier, but that whole idea that you're using Christmas as the background for this, right? Or the backdrop for this.
Right.
Because you think about the juxtaposition, and I wrote down this one thing about the juxtaposition of the violence that's taking place. I guess it goes even deeper than just juxtaposition, but the peace that I guess the scene offers when Anna has her headphones plugged in or earphones plugged in, and the zombies are attacking behind her. But then there's also the lighthearted music that's playing. And I thought of a few scenes from other zombie movies where that same type of thing is taking place. Like we mentioned Shaun of the Dead, when the zombie apocalypse is taking place and Shaun is going to work like he had been normally, or going down to the store like he normally does, and you just see all hell is broken loose around him. But he's going about his day the way he normally does, and he's just completely oblivious to it, just like she is. But I like how you're using, or at least in this film, how they're using the Christmas time, which is typically, or at least stereotypically and generally supposed to be a peaceful holiday, right? You're not supposed to be really working. You get, because of school, you have a couple of weeks off. Depending on where you work, you might have a week off or a few days. You spend some time with family. The most hectic thing is supposed to be traveling or trying to find the right gift. Right. It's not supposed to be, people that being murdered, just randomly and indiscriminately. But just seeing that image there it gives you an insight into the chaos that's to come, right? Not to mention that she's also a teenager, so how many things, at least when we were all teenagers, were going on around us that we really didn't pay attention to or give a shit about?
Yeah, I have that problem now.
Well, we've grown into that. I mean, it's that whole Gen X thing.
What were you going to say, Michael?
No, I think that's exactly it. I think this, once again, this what you're saying reinforces how this movie is allegorically about the teenage experience. It's sort of like how you're allowed to be blissfully unaware until you're not. And I think that she, in just sort of the arc of Anna's, story in this movie, she has that sort of agency and that willful defiance that teenagers do, also that blissful ignorance. And she holds on to her agency, but she also has to discover what it means to grow up. And things change, people fall away. The world isn't always great. And I do like, as we've said, and we very much reinforce, that she stays true to herself throughout it. But I think that, the distillation of what happens to her over the course of the movie is that journey of adolescence. That's where it starts, very teen movie. It's like her biggest issue is that she's pining over a boy who wasn't very nice. Well, right. Newsflash, most boys aren't like that. Welcome to the world. But that now that she knows that the world is an even bigger place, that's the least of her problems now,
Bringing it back to Shaun of the Dead, the main difference I see between the two is that Shaun is always positioned where he can't see it happening, whereas Anna's walking directly through it and just blissfully unaware.
Yeah.
And I think that that's interesting because I don't feel like Shaun would have had the same reaction walking down this street. he would have been like, what the fuck is going on? Whereas he was always looking the other way when something would hit or there was something blocking his view. And Anna, I mean, I have teenage boys. This is definitely a teenage thing. No matter what's happening around them, she's in her own fucking world. And I think that that's great.
Well, and they doubly sell that by having Josh not notice anything either. Not until they both run into that delicious snowman zombie do they not, because that's it. Like, you know, they're just like, oh, friend, and now we're going to have our little dance number. Meanwhile, there's explosions happening around them, you know. and even once they're aware, I love the nuance of when they're looking at the burning Christmas tree that Josh stops to eat a banana. Like, that to me is still such a teenage thing to do.
It's got potassium.
Yeah.
And my favorite scene in the entire movie is when Anna knocks the head off that snowman guy and Josh screams. Josh's scream is the funniest thing to me. I don't know.
It's so good.
Well, you know, here's the other thing. Even when the snowman, because I'm looking at my notes about the snowman, where it's like cute snowman or something. You think about the way that we decorate things. We go from Halloween, where we decorate specifically to, I guess, take part in the holiday or have scary decorations or something like that, right? So a zombie film or a horror film that's around Halloween works because it kind of fits into the aesthetic, right?
Right. This
works because it makes those cute decorations and costumes look grotesque. Because the snowman himself, you know, when you first see it, you just see kind of the body and then you see the guy's face. But the way that the two of them react, Anna and Josh react to it, well, actually Anna more than Josh. She says, "Excuse me, I'm a first aider. I'm a first aider. Do you need some help, sir?" Like, she immediately goes to like, "Oh, this guy needs help," as opposed to I think even Josh's, you know, when he sees that this guy's not the, you know, whatever he is, his reaction is completely different, where it's like, mate, calm down, mate. But when this guy like jumps or lashes out at Anna, you know, after she's offered her help, she immediately hits him with her bag because her reaction and timing is so quick. It's kind of like, fuck you, I offered to help and you jumped at me. Oh my gosh, you're a zombie. Let's go ahead or at least you're something else, and we need to go ahead and eradicate you. We need to do something about this. And I love that they use the movies as a guideline of how to do this. They're like, I was like, how do they do it in this? They go for the head, they go for the brain, and they, you know, of course, knock his head off with the seesaw. Which again, when you're talking about agency, she's so in charge where she tells Josh, like, stand right here. She uses him as bait.
Yeah.
So quick thinking. She uses him as bait to get the snowman zombie to walk towards the seesaw so she can pop his head off. And again, like James said, that scream at that moment is just outstanding. It's great because I love her character as far as this is almost in the same vein as Becky, which we covered earlier in the year, and Home Alone. As far as you've got these people who would you think about as being so vulnerable, so unassuming, but they think and they sometimes intuitively respond to a crisis.
Right. Well, I mean, and Anna's dad, I believe it's Anna's dad, maybe it's Josh. One of the characters says, "You always know what to do." It's annoying. You know, it's Josh. Josh says it when they're in the park. And like, she proves it. She proves it all throughout the movie. She never seems to be like without an idea. And I think that's really great.
Her dad says it at the end too. Yeah.
Right. I did kind of want to cycle back to something that you said about how coming off of the heels of Halloween, where you use all this spooky imagery and that works in a horror movie, and then how Christmas subverts it because there's such sweet and kind imagery and iconography. But what I really love about holiday horror, and I think about this a lot, is it kind of exposes the question of, are these things actually sweet, or have we convinced ourselves that they are? Because I really sometimes stand back and think about kind of all the stuff that we do at Christmas. It's like, I'm going to put the quickly decomposing husk of a dead tree in my house and decorate its dying limbs. So also we can prepare for the arrival of a mythical figure who we have told our children watches everything we do all year round. So this one night he can break and enter into our home and leave us things. It's like, This is all very fucked up and weird. It's weird.
But he only leaves us things if we did everything that he wanted us to do.
Yes.
Otherwise, he leaves us cold.
This is all
And then sometimes he leaves a little elf to watch you.
Right. Oh, the elf on the shelf. It's all extremely alarming, I think.
Yes. Luckily, that has not made it into my house yet. But even with that, some other TV shows, I think like American Dad and a couple of movies have even covered how Santa's actually the villain. He's the bad guy. He's not the good guy. And it's not just the watching you. It's the whole idea of rewarding you with various items that you want. Whether or not you did behave yourself. And the whole idea around Krampus is supposed to punish you for doing bad things. And some people have theorized or gotten into the whole God versus Satan and at least that discussion of watching you and then threatening to punish you for your behavior. Whereas Satan himself is supposed to guide you into a different direction, like prevent you from doing things. So it's a really great discussion that comes up when you're talking about the dichotomy between Santa Claus and Krampus, God and the devil, and all these things that are going on, where it does rely on people to pass down those legends, those myths, or just the mythology itself, in order for us to change our perspective on it. But yeah, you're definitely right with the way that we look at any of these decorations, even the ones that are outside. We're going to build a snowman.
Right.
So this is a temporary being or temporary assumed sentient being that we're creating in our yard that is going to die in front of us because it's going to slowly melt, or you can knock its head off, or whatever is going on, because there's this, children believe, and I was one of those kids, that because of Frosty the Snowman, if you put that hat on his head, he's going to come to life.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and what is Rudolph if not a story about the brutalization of an outsider till they prove useful to everybody else? It's like
all because he looks a little different.
Exactly.
I guess this is a good time to tell everybody, or at least tell you, Michael, I'm not the biggest fan of Christmas.
I am.
Mainly for the reasons that you've listed. And I'm glad that when we started, you talked about, working in retail. Retail is the thing that killed my love for Christmas. I still like the time of year. I like the movies, especially some of the movies that people argue whether or not they are holiday movies or Christmas movies. But yeah.
Oh, I mean, and I think
it definitely opens something.
The two big offenders, the big offender you're talking about usually is Die Hard, but I always say both Die Hard and Die Hard 2 are unequivocally Christmas movies, because the first one's about office parties and the second one's about travel, and both of those things are only truly the most terrible at Christmas. So it's like, yes, that to me is exactly what those are about. Now, you know what? I think that I've talked about this in interviews before, and I don't think it's a big shock or a revelation to anyone that I actually frequently struggle with the holiday myself, despite a lot of the media and things that I've written. But I think it's because of all the things you're saying. And I always tell people, I think this is why there is a devotion to holiday movies and why people like Christmas movies and holiday content. Because when you unpack it, movie Christmas is not the same as real Christmas.
Exactly.
Christmas, in reality, whether you love it or not, is often stressful. It can cause financial hardship. There's always a lot of things that go into it that, despite the light, bright fun of the season, it can be very trying time for some people and a very lonely time for some people. So we turn to the movies, which distill in them the idea of what we think Christmas should be, this idea of togetherness, of coziness, of nostalgia. And so I think that maybe the danger is we've often conflated movie Christmas with real Christmas without remembering those are often two very different adventures. But it's okay that they walk hand in hand if it makes one a little better for you than the other,
I want to talk about one of my favorite characters in this.
Okay.
Nick. I love how Nick is portrayed in a way that reflects her views of him throughout the film.
Yes.
He starts out as, not creepy, but he's got that vibe to him where she's interested but also disgusted at the same time. And I don't know about you guys, but I've definitely been there. And angry with him and annoyed with him and whatever else, but she still can't stop looking at him, right? But the way that his character is shown to the audience reflects this as well, because he's a hunter, as he calls himself. She sees his aggressive side, and she sees like his survival side as well, which is also something that we inherently look for. We look for someone we can survive with. And then when we get to the point where he breaks down and tells her what actually happened to his dad, the audience immediately feels differently about Nick. And I love that they were able to make us 100% take this journey with her without realizing we were doing it. And even at the end, like, he's along, but he's not the focal point. Like, you almost forget he's in the car because you care about Anna and you care about stuff, and Nick's just kind of there. And I feel like that's where she is with him at that point. They went through all this together, but it's not like he's coming to Australia.
Right. I think Nick is a really good example of something we don't see a lot in movies, and it's just usually based on one-time constraints and like in how stories are constructed. I think a lot of times when we tell stories, especially something like this, which is already so allegorical, you kind of want to view things as black and white. But the reality is most people are not actually as bad as their worst day, and not as good as their best day. Everybody sort of exists in shades of gray. Whereas movies tend to this is the bad guy, this is the good guy, this is who you need to like, and this is who you don't. But I think what's really great about Nick is he represents a character who he has not done right by her. So obviously from her lens, he's not great. But we get to learn that he's not all bad either. That doesn't necessarily mean that she will keep him in her life. But I think that it's a very interesting and smart way to present a shades of gray character in a world like this, especially because we don't get to see those in movies of this kind very often.
And I love that we don't even get a tease that they'll end up together. A lot of movies would have at least tried to, will they, and I love that that's never even an option. I think that's great. But I really like the character, and I love his story with his father and how he had to kill him. And I mean, that ripped me up because I have my own history with my dad when he was dying, where I basically almost turned off his oxygen tank because everything was so bad. And sorry, I wasn't planning on going there. But yeah, so it just really resonated with me, and it was done so well that you got so much character at once with very few lines. You learned so fucking much about Nick from that. And that's the kind of quality writing I'm always looking for. And while I would argue that a lot of this movie, the characters are a little flat and I'd like to know more about them, again, time constraints, whatever else, I love how much they put into Nick with this.
Yeah, and I think that he even proves his mettle later when Anna thinks that she may have to kill her father, and he, knowing what that entails, stops her. I think that's a really powerful but brief moment.
Initially, I did not like him. And even intuitively, when it got to that part where he was by himself and they made that comment about his dad and all this other stuff. I mean, before he reveals that he killed him, it's like this guy is putting on a lot of macho bravado right now. He's hiding some shit, especially during that song about hunting the zombies and beating them and doing all that stuff where. The assumption is that they were out looting and really they were getting stuff, one, to survive, and then two, to fight the zombies. So there are a couple of curveballs that are thrown. But once he and his group of friends are assembled with Anna and her group of friends, you see that this guy thrives off of not necessarily being the center of attention, but he thrives off of the identity that other people built for him, if that makes sense. where his friends see him as a certain guy, so he's kind of like, I got to live up to being the pack leader. I got to live up to being the alpha. So we're gonna go fight these zombies. But you get the sense that something is going on with him, and I'm glad that the reveal was that he had to kill his dad because he realized what was going on. But by the end of the film, by the beginning of the film, I see him as this bullying douchebag, right? But at the end, when they're in the car, I just see him as a scared child.
Right.
And I'm not casting aspersions to him. It's just one of those things of the way he's presented on camera, the look that he has. Of course, he's going to be scared because there are these zombies around, right? But I think it's more so the fear of that everybody in that car is feeling. What now? Like, everybody we know is gone. Everybody's dead. There are all these zombies here. We don't know what place is safe. I'm not concerned about getting with you. You're not concerned with getting with me. We're just concerned with getting the hell out of here. And I love that was a cool touch because he's the one who goes from being this tough teenage boy to being I don't know what to do. And right. I love that Steph has kind of just I love Steph throughout the entire film, but I especially love the part where they're Anna and Nick are fighting, waiting for the zombies to descend on them. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, where the fuck is Steph? Where is she? And then she shows up and said, "Saved your life, bitches." And it was a great line to deliver because we've seen so many of these films where somebody comes riding in a car or a horse or whatever, like, get on, get in, and then they drive off. It was a very teenage thing to do and a kind of a teenage badass thing to do of like, saved your life. And they, of course, get in the car and drive off, which I love the name of the town. I mean, it's a perfectly picked name for considering the type of story this is. It's Little Haven.
Right.
It's supposed to be peaceful, just like Christmas is supposed to be peaceful. Or at least as you said, Michael. Christmas is supposed to be peaceful when it's presented to us in television, film, or even in song format. It's this peaceful time. It's the most beautiful time of the year, right? It's right. It has a certain feel to it that other holidays don't. I mean, Valentine's Day, yeah, if you're single, it sucks. 4th of July, not so much. Halloween, there's a certain feel to it where it's pumpkins, it's cinnamon, it's those different things. But Christmas itself, whether it's the 25th or just December 1st through 31st, it has a really different feel. And I like that they pull you back into that calmness of not knowing what to do or not knowing where these people are going to end up. Unlike other zombie movies where either everyone's killed off or you have that happily ever after ending, or as they allude to in the song in the beginning, and James and I were texting back and forth, the Hollywood ending, which was a great thing to have in the beginning and a great thing to come back to, where you don't know what it's going to be like because we're not going to write this to be happy at the end. We're not going to write this to where we completely succeeded and killed off all the zombies and went back to normal, or everybody just dies and, we're going to leave it like that. But I love the way that they end it.
Yeah, I mean, survival is the Christmas gift of this movie, really. One of my favorite things, and I thought about it when I rewatched it for this, and I say favorite in a sort of darkly sarcastic way, is there's a moment where all of the parents and teachers are waiting in the cafeteria in sort of that lockdown situation, and someone says the government will sort this out, and I'm just like, okay, because it's sort of like the government will sort this out, and they didn't, and that's the biggest learning lesson that we all could take from zombie movies, is that in every zombie movie someone thinks that the government's going to fix things and they don't, and welcome to Corona 2020.
Or just wait for the army.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to disagree because I think that in Return of the Living Dead, the military took care of it.
I mean,
yeah, they took care of it all right. Just not the way that they took care of it in a very. They took care of it in a very American way.
For? I couldn't resist. But another side note about
movie, it's the same thing.
Another side note about Nick that I was just thinking about. You even get a ton of characterization from him when he says what his dad's last words were to him. Don't let me down. Yeah. You've let me down every fucking time. Like, you learn so much from Nick from that. Like, your dad's last thoughts of you were that you're always a fuck up. And I don't even know if I can trust you to kill me correctly. Holy shit.
Little did that dad know is that his son and his friends would figure out how to kill a zombie with watermelons later in the films.
That's right. I still don't know if the physics
about
of that
this
quite
was
right.
comical.
Oh yeah. I mean, I know that the candy cane, the candy cane like lawn dart or whatever the hell it is the iconic weapon of this movie. But the couple times that I've seen this, whenever like Nick's crony like busts the zombie up with the watermelons, I'm like, how's that work? But I also love it. Like, I'm absolutely obsessed.
I don't know if either one of you seen this, but there's this video from years ago. I can't remember what the television show was, something like The Amazing Race or whatever. But this woman is going to slingshot a watermelon, and it backfires on her, and it hits her in the face and explodes. And it's been online for years. Again, I can't remember what it is, but it's been turned into a short form video. And every time when this happened, when they had the two watermelons, I was thinking to myself, like, are they going to slingshot a watermelon at one of these zombies? But then when you see it, I had the same reaction. I'm like, I don't think that would work. The bowling balls, the bowling pins, I get that definitely works. I don't know about those small personal sized watermelons. But then again, I need to suspend belief at this moment because I'm in the slapstick moment of killing zombies or disposing of zombies, or excuse me, dispatching of zombies with watermelons. It's almost like Gallagher was sitting over there like, use a hammer, use a mallet. This is something that was sparked, or at least a question I had that was sparked from especially that scene with the boys doing their thing with hunting the zombies. If you were in this same situation, what song would you be playing during the zombie apocalypse or while you were fighting or killing zombies? Or I guess.
Oh, to get revved up for battle?
Or just while you're doing it.
Oh gosh. I mean, what's a good zombie killing song? I feel like for some reason it's got to be like a hair metal jam, right? No, maybe not. That's a bad choice. Although I can see like busting up zombies to like Twisted Sister or something.
Okay. We're not gonna take it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a sucker for a good like overly dramatic moment, and I feel like that would do it. But I don't know. Good question. Anybody else? I'm curious.
Judas by Fozzy. I play it nonstop anyway, so why not?
I mean, I think that I really did. I think that like Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song would be cool here, but it's also so overused. Like, I don't want to be a cliche, but also it would be perfect, Look, let me live here, at least for a few minutes.
What's yours, Don? Like Wham's Last Christmas or what?
Oh, well, according to Key and Peele, I don't have to worry about this, so I can just sit out at my house and cook out.
Nice.
But I would probably, I've given this a lot of thought. It would probably stop Hammer Time.
Oh, really?
It would probably, no, that would be one just for fun. I think the other one, oh my gosh. Somebody posted something where it was like, oh, what's the song that you would play if you fought your boss in the parking lot? And I just had to laugh at that. I was like, God, I like my boss now. I mean, I wouldn't fight him. But previous bosses, we might have to throw down, and I'd have to play some Rage Against the Machine or something. But I don't know. I comically, I would go with something like, Stop Hammer Time. Realistically, to really get me revved up for something like that, it would have to be like Metallica's One.
All right.
Or Ride the Lightning or something like that. It would have to be something, because that's one of those, like, if you're running or working, like, there's certain songs that they're not necessarily your favorites, but it's just like the beat of the song or just the tone of it just makes you, it makes you run a little faster. It makes you lift more weights, and, just might work.
Yeah, I think we're in the same place where there's got to be some power guitar involved, right? That's what that's what I'm getting, like Barracuda or something.
Ooh, that could be fun. I would probably also add Ludacris's Move Bitch, just because I love that song. And I think that it would really help my momentum in the moment.
You know what? Now that I thought about it, Wet Ass Pussy. That's what it would have to be.
There it is.
Because then you can roll, you have your sledgehammer, right? And you can do all the dance moves while you're killing zombies. Because there's like a punching the ground thing, so you can imagine like the zombies on the ground and you're hitting with a hammer. No?
Grab a bucket and a mop. There it is. It tells you, right? It's right there.
I want to apologize to any listener that pictured Don doing these dance moves.
That's okay. I'll put it on TikTok soon. There's some zombies in this house. There's some zombies in this house. See, it works.
I'm sold.
I am. How about Let the Bodies Hit the Floor?
Oh, yeah.
I had that as an early choice, believe it or not.
I like that. I was just like, sure, remember that song?
Good old Frowning Pool.
As long as we're talking music, is there a song in this movie that really stands out to you, like something that you would listen to outside of just watching it?
I mean, I actually think most of the songs are pretty cool for like what the, I like when I think of a musical, like to see how the songs overall fit the story. I think Breakaway is a great opening number. I really like the human voice where they realize the world is falling apart. But I'm going to have to go with Hollywood Ending because it's so cheese in a good way. Like, I love that it kind of leads you to believe with the choreography and everything that this is going to be like a Disney Channel musical. And then it goes real wrong. And I love that. I love that it's like, let's set up a false expectation with a really powerful message, which, as Don said, we'll come back to,
The only complaint that I have with No Such Thing as a Hollywood Ending is that there's a little tip of the hat that Lisa's going to die, because she's the one who distinctly says, I'm going to get my Hollywood ending. And as soon as she said that, I was like, well, she's dead.
Sometimes in a Hollywood ending, that's how it goes.
So nobody likes Christmas without you? Oh, sorry, Christmas means nothing without you.
What a jam, right? Like,
I just immediately thought of it, having worked in a high school. I immediately thought about, like, oh my God, Santa's going to drop his load. Oh my God, this would not have passed. Oh, yeah. This would not have passed like the first inspection. I went to my former high school made the news like in the early 2000s because they had like a halftime or pep rally dance number that basically looked like lap dances. So, it was just one of those things. I'm like, my school was never in the news. I've never heard anything about them. And then it was just like, teachers and administrators are under investigation for allowing, a very risque performance. But no, I would have to go. Realistically, I would have to go with either of the two that you mentioned, which was Breakaway or Hollywood Ending, maybe even Soldier at War.
I think that's a great number two.
So all the songs to me, or I should say most of the songs themselves, were very insightful and very revealing about so many things revolving around these characters and what they're facing. But the Breakaway one for me, and then probably Hollywood Ending second, just stood out just because of what they represented, not just within the film, but just within that time period in which we've all been through.
Yeah,
absolutely. I really expected you to pick the evil professor's song.
No, I was not going to pick the headmaster. I liked him at the beginning. And even out to the point where because I wrote this one down, it was like, oh, what should a civilization do when at the edge? We prioritize. So because you see how his character even devolves, because it makes no sense. Like the stuff that he does toward the end of the movie really makes no sense. And that's really a reflection of who he is and the idea that, I'm the headmaster of this school. You're all supposed to listen to me. Even if the stuff I say makes no sense, I'm the one who's in charge. You're supposed to listen to me. And it's very reflective of somebody who gets into a position of power and has no idea how to act accordingly. And that's either by understanding the job that they have or understanding how to deal with people. And I just saw him as a guy who liked having power for no other reason than to have power.
Of the characters in the movie, he's not my favorite character, but I think in line with what Don's saying, I understand his kind of place in this movie because he represents sort of a diminishing power structure, especially in the lives of the kids. Like if this movie is all about the allegory of leaving, he, as the world falls apart, kind of represents, I think, what teenagers think those kind of people are like and the kind of demand that they have. He's very much a mustache twirling villain. But I also think that there's something a little bit delightful. I have to give credit to Paul Kaye, who plays that character, because he plays him as such like a sniveling evil, but it takes a good performer to play someone so unlikable, because he had to make all of those choices. And when he's completely unhinged at the end, I think it's kind of delicious because it's just like this actor's just like, this is my moment. I'm just going to go into it. Like he crowd surfs into death.
So great.
Yeah.
Yeah. The mustache twirling, because he almost does that same type of villain move, by tying up the dad, as if you would have tied up a young damsel in distress to the railroad tracks. He's using the dad as bait for Anna. It was good to see a zombie film done differently, because we've had a discussion before about how zombie movies themselves, they were starting to get tired, if that makes sense.
Right.
As far as the way they presented them, and it was always done in this very dreary, drab kind of presentation. Aside from the comedic versions like Zombieland or 2 in this film, and a couple of older ones. So it was good to actually see a zombie film have fun with itself by dabbling in different areas.
So really fast, I want to talk about how they react to different deaths, because every one of them experiences somebody that they care about dying. And I think that is so important and so something we can all relate to right now. And what I like about it is that each one happens basically in different places at different times. They're involved in different ways. And just the actual reaction. So you have Nick. Nick, obviously, he kills his father off screen and that was hard. But when he loses his friends, holy shit. His face. And yet he's in this terrible situation because they're actively attacking right then. So he can't concentrate on it. He has to go. You have Anna, she loses John. He gets bit and then basically sacrifices himself by throwing her out. And she's trying to fight and go back and pulling her out. You have Steph when Chris and Lisa get bit. And she stands there and literally waves goodbye and watches them be in love before she goes. And I think it's interesting how, and then of course Anna loses her father at the end as well. But I think it's interesting how each one is faced with that same thing. And yet the writing is so fucking solid that the reactions are very, very true to the characters. And I wanted to get your view on that, Michael. How does that hit you?
Well, I think that it's a credit to the writing. That's really any time you watch a horror movie and the characters have sort of unique reactions to a circumstance because the character is nuanced enough to know who they are, that's a credit to someone who developed the characters really smartly. I mean, it's real easy, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions, but it's real easy. Like you make a movie with a knife wielding maniac and someone kills, and then like the automatic reaction is to like just kind of quiver and scream. And I'm sure that many people, that would be their reaction, but not everybody. And we know that because humans are complicated and everybody approaches things a little bit differently. And I think that this movie handled the nuance of their characters in a very deft and smart way in every circumstance. Yes. Like, and I think that like, had they betrayed that even in these intense moments, it would have lost something. But I think, Steph, from the moment we meet her to the end, has a singular driving focus of like, changing the world in kind of this chosen family circumstance. And we know that Anna has agency, and Nick, even though he is in love with Anna, knows he's not going to be able to be with her. His world is still all about her. So his like final moment, even in death, is to protect her. I mean, I think it's great. I think that it allows for really emotional moments.
And it just kind of rips your heart out too. It's so but she also gets the chance to say goodbye, and most people don't even get that, I mean, you expect it with Anna and her father. That's how movies work. We need this big talk, right? But so much is said with just the wave and watching each other. And I love this moment that Steph has.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I think that another truly, truly powerful moment is Anna leaving that theater. I mean, she already had the goodbye conversation with her dad. That could have been your like key dramatic moment. But as she's walking out, he's like, "Hey, Anna, Merry Christmas." That is the emotional gut punch right there, and that I think, again, still remains true to the characters.
All right. So this is the point where we usually throw out some films that we think people should watch if they enjoyed this. I'm going to go first just because I want to say Zombieland, and I know Don's going to steal it from me if I let him talk. So Zombieland is my favorite zombie film of all time, and we did an episode about it long ago, so check it out. What else do you guys have that you feel people should watch if they loved this? And you can mention as many or as few as you like.
Well, I think, the obvious choice, and we even mentioned it by name several times over the course of this episode, is Shaun of the Dead, because I think Shaun of the Dead, in a very smart way, racked the conversation about how modern zombie movies can be made and be funny, but also be meaningful. And I think there is sort of a through line with the making of Shaun of the Dead leading the path for Anna and the Apocalypse to be made a decade or so later. So obviously Edgar Wright's Shaun of the Dead. I also think that the nuance of some of this, it pulled on a lot of different references. Go back and check out the George Romero movies to see, the foundations. But also, if you want to see a great intersection of horror and music, check out Once More with Feeling, the season 6 episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer that integrates the music into the horror. And I think that certainly someone, when they wrote this movie, watched that episode and was inspired by it.
Very cool. Don, what do you got?
All right, I got a few. I'm going to start off with one of my favorites, The Return of the Living Dead, which, again, it's I put it down as a zombie because of the sheer humor that is thrown into this film, intentionally or just by accident, because I find way too many things funny in that movie. There's the Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse that came out a few years ago, like 2014.
I haven't seen that.
Featuring the only zombie dancing to Britney Spears in cinematic history.
Yeah. There's a zombie that dances to Britney Spears, and I haven't seen this? What the fuck?
Sure is, yeah.
I know what I'm doing tonight.
Well, I know James likes his romance movies, his romance in the things. There was Warm Bodies that came out a while ago where the zombie comes back to life or whatever. Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which I remember was not too long after Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, but Pride and Prejudice and Zombies was done much better. And then recently there was a film with Bill Murray and oh my gosh, I forgot Kylo Ren's name. The Dead Don't Die.
Yeah, that movie's a lot of fun. It's very esoteric.
So I mean, that's my list of things to include that people would find fun to watch when compared to. I'm sorry, that you could easily go and watch along the same lines as this film, whether you're looking for a zombie film or something, as we talked about, something that bleeds through on several different genres.
Interesting story about Dead Don't Die, and I'll make it quick, but I just think that this is always of interest to horror fans or fans of cinema. The Dead Don't Die was directed by Jim Jarmusch, who is known widely more for kind of art house, auteur-based, hoity-toity cinema, in a good way. I say that with love because I'm a fan. But Jim Jarmusch had made a movie called Only Lovers Left Alive, which is a vampire movie, kind of done in his style. And while they were doing it, Tilda Swinton, who's the star of Only Lovers Left Alive, just was needling him and being like, so when are you going to do a zombie movie? And Jim Jarmusch, who had never really made a horror movie and didn't intend on making another one, was like, all right, whatever. And I guess he was sitting at home and the idea hit him, and he called Tilda Swinton and said, I'm going to make the zombie movie. And she said, oh, goody. Don't Die happened.
That's amazing.
I can hear that in her voice.
Yes. And she's in it. I like, that's kind of it. If you browbeat Jim Jarmusch into making a zombie movie, you better be prepared to be in it too. So.
Oh, that's great. I do feel we'd be remiss if we talk horror and musicals and don't mention the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So you should check that out too if you haven't.
Absolutely.
Oh, and of course, Poultry Guys. Forgot about that one.
Poultry. We love Lloyd.
I mean, we mentioned it earlier, but I mean, as far as like this discussion now, and I know I'm leaving some other ones out, but there's some, of course, there's some really good films that blend into other areas. So, and I'm excited to share this one.
You should also check out Deathcember. I hear that's good. Oh, no. Yeah.
Yes.
So, Michael, why don't you tell everybody where they can check out Deathcember and how they can follow you online or check out your other works?
Sure. Well, Deathcember has recently been released stateside on VOD and cable on demand. And so you should be able to find it on most places where those things are found. I know, it's on Amazon Prime and iTunes and Apple Play and all of that stuff. It may be released on physical Blu-ray through Scream Factory next year if enough of you tune in and watch it this year. So that's kind of in your hands. As far as my other stuff, well, if you are interested in something less spooky in your holiday season, I do have a brand new non-horror Christmas movie out this year called Christmas with a Crown that was entirely a Canadian production and is out on VOD and DVD now. It's about a prince and his adventure in a small town during Christmas. I also am a writer and director on Netflix's The Boulet Brothers Dragula, which I know has quite a number of fans. All of season 3 is on Netflix right now, and we're going to hopefully be shooting season 4 soon. All my other movies, I'm lucky because I work a lot, and I am very grateful. Just browse IMDb. They're all out there somewhere. You'll find something to your taste, and if you like it, thank you. If you don't, it's fine too. And you can find me on Twitter at Michael Varrati, also Instagram at Michael Varrati. Don't add me on Facebook. I never log in.
So until next time, I am James Sabata.
And I am Don Guillory.
And we will see you next week here on the Necronoma.com.